Okay, so don't think of an elephant. Have you ever noticed how, like, certain phrases in politics just seem to stick, even if you're like, wait, that doesn't make sense?
It's like, that classic game, right? Don't think of an elephant. What happens? You immediately picture one.
Totally. And Lakoff argues that's not an accident. It's like conservatives have been playing this language game and winning for decades.
Yeah, they figured out that language doesn't just describe political reality, it shapes it. And progressives, we're playing catch up.
Exactly. So Lakoff uses this really interesting analogy of two family models to kind of break down how conservatives and progressives see the world. Have you heard of this whole strict father versus nurturant parent thing?
Oh, yeah. It's a brilliant way to understand why it often feels like we're speaking two different languages.
Right. So explain it to me like I'm like totally clueless here. What is the strict father model all about?
Okay, so Lakoff says this model, which aligns more with the conservative worldview, basically sees the world as a dangerous place.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
And in a dangerous world, you need discipline, right? You need a strong father figure to set the rules, enforce them.
And that's where the government comes in.
Exactly. The government in this model is there to punish wrongdoers, maintain order, not necessarily to be like handing out help.
So it's very much a pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with the nurturant parent model, which is more aligned with progressive values.
Okay, so less about punishment, more about like nurturing and empathy.
Exactly. It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone, not just those who succeed by a specific definition.
Right, so the government's role is more proactive, protecting citizens, promoting fairness, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting because Lakoff doesn't just lay out these models in the abstract. He shows how they play out in, like, real
Yeah,
politics.
give me an example.
Think about the phrase tax relief. It's everywhere, right?
Yeah, taxes are bad, relief is good. Simple.
Right, but think about what that framing does. The word relief implies a burden, like taxes are inherently bad, something you need to be freed from.
So anyone who supports raising taxes, even for good reasons,
Mm.
becomes the bad guy.
Exactly. They're the ones standing in the way of relief. And it's all thanks to a single, carefully chosen word.
That's wild. It's like a Jedi mind trick.
Right. Lakoff even suggests alternative frames that progressives could use, like taxes as investments or dues we pay for a civilized society.
It's so interesting how a subtle shift in language can completely change the way people think about something. It's like, magic, but with words.
Absolutely. And Lakoff has a ton of these examples. Like, remember when George W. Bush kept using the phrase permission slip about the Iraq War?
Oh, right. We don't need a permission slip to defend America. I always thought that was weird. Like, who are we asking permission from? The UN.
Exactly. That seemingly harmless phrase was carefully chosen to tap into the whole strict father model.
Go on.
Think about it. Who needs permission slips? Kids. By using that language, Bush was subtly positioning America as the adult, the authority figure on the world stage.
So it's like he's reinforcing this power dynamic where America is the parent and other countries are like our kids.
Precisely. And it plays right into the conservative worldview. And the thing is, they've gotten so good at this, at consistently applying this model to, like, everything.
Education, the environment, you name it. It's like they're playing 3D chess while we're stuck on checkers.
It often feels that way, right? But Lakoff doesn't just leave us hanging. He actually offers some strategies for, like, how progressives can fight back.
Okay, because I was going to say, I'm starting to feel a little, like, intellectually outgunned here. Give me some hope.
Well, Lakoff says one of the most important things progressives can do is stop simply reacting to conservative frames and instead, like, proactively define their own terms, define the language of our values.
That's harder than it sounds, right? Because they've often already framed the debate before we even get to the table.
It's definitely a challenge, but Lakoff argues that progressives actually already have a powerful moral framework in that nurturant parent model.
Okay, so how do we use that?
We need to connect every issue, every argument, back to those core values: empathy, fairness, responsibility.
So instead of just arguing for, say, universal health care, you frame it as a moral imperative to take care of each other.
Exactly. You tap into those deep-seated values that already resonate with so many people, progressive or not.
I like it. It's not just about policy. It's about what kind of society we want to live in.
Yeah.
It's about values.
Exactly. And Lakoff argues that when you do that, you connect with people on a much deeper level. You're not just appealing to their heads, you're appealing to their hearts.
That makes sense. After all, people don't just vote with their brains.
Exactly. They vote with their guts, their values. And that's why understanding how framing works is so important.
It's not just about winning arguments. It's about, like, understanding how people's minds work.
Exactly. It's about connecting with them on a deeper level. And that's what Lakoff calls strategic initiatives.
Okay, I think we need to unpack that. What does he mean by strategic initiatives?
So, one of Lakoff's criticisms of progressives is that we often get stuck focusing on individual issues without thinking about the bigger picture.
We're so busy fighting each battle, we lose sight of the war.
Right. A strategic initiative is about connecting the dots between these seemingly disparate issues and presenting a cohesive vision for the future.
So it's not just about advocating for a bunch of different policies. It's about weaving them into a compelling narrative, a story that people can get behind.
Exactly. Like, think about the new Apollo initiative.
Mhm.
It's a perfect example of a strategic initiative because it takes a complex issue like climate change.
Which can feel kind of abstract, right? Like doom and gloom way off in the future.
Exactly. But the new Apollo initiative frames it in a way that resonates more broadly. It's not just about saving the planet.
It's about jobs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Creating jobs,
Yeah.
boosting the economy.
And isn't there an angle about, like, making America a leader in, like, green technology?
Exactly. It taps into those classic American values, innovation, progress, competitiveness, but it ties it all to addressing this, like, critical global challenge.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about, like, yelling about the problem. It's about offering a solution. And not just any solution, but one that, like, kind of scratches that American pride itch.
Exactly. And that's the brilliance of strategic initiatives. They paint this picture of a better future, and they show how progressive values can get us there.
It's like good marketing, basically.
There you go. Progressives need to think more like marketers, like storytellers. We need to craft these compelling narratives that get people excited, that inspire them to act.
Because facts alone don't win elections.
Sadly, no. It's about tapping into those universal values that resonate, whether you're left, right, or somewhere in between.
So how do we get better at that? Any tips from Lakoff? Because it seems like conservatives are, like, speaking fluent values while we're stuck on, like, policy vocabulary 101.
Well, he stresses the importance of understanding your audience. What are their values? What are their hopes, their fears? What keeps them up at night?
Okay, so it's about empathy, basically.
Exactly. And once you understand that, you can frame your arguments in a way that connects. You find that common ground.
So it's about building bridges, not walls. I like it.
Exactly. It's about reminding people that we're all in this together, and that by working together, we can create a better future.
Okay, so we've talked about framing, strategic initiatives, tapping into values, but Lakoff also warns about some of the less than honest tactics that are often used in political discourse. Specifically, he talks about Orwellian language.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. And it's everywhere in politics.
Give me an example.
Think about terms like the Clear Skies Initiative or the Healthy Forests Program.
Those sound pretty good to me. Who doesn't want clear skies and healthy forests?
Exactly. That's the point. They sound appealing. But Lakoff argues that these terms often masked policies that were actually harmful to the environment.
Wait, so they were using language that sounds good, but actually pushing the opposite agenda.
Exactly. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. It might look better.
But it's still a pig.
Precisely. And Lakoff argues that when you see this kind of doublespeak, it reveals something really important. It means they know their true agenda wouldn't be popular if they were just upfront about it.
So it's like a backhanded admission that they're trying to pull a fast one.
Right. And he encourages progressives to call out this kind of doublespeak, to expose the gap between the language and the reality. But, and this is important, he also stresses the importance of offering a compelling alternative. Don't just tear down their argument, build something better in its place.
Don't just criticize, create.
Exactly. Now, remember how we talked about the importance of connecting issues back to core values? Lakoff says this is especially important when we're dealing with what he calls slippery slope initiatives.
Slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
I feel a metaphor coming on. Explain.
Okay, so imagine a literal slippery slope, right? You take one step, seems harmless enough, but then it's two, then three, and suddenly you're sliding faster and faster, and you can't stop.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Lakoff argues that this is a tactic conservatives often use. They push for a seemingly small concession, a minor policy change, but it's really just the first step on a slippery slope towards a much larger goal.
Give me a concrete example.
The whole debate around partial birth abortion is a classic example of this.
Okay, and just to be clear, That term, partial birth abortion, it's not even medically accurate.
Exactly. It's a term that was specifically crafted to be emotionally charged, to evoke a visceral reaction.
So it's not really about banning one specific procedure. It's about shifting the entire conversation, framing it in a way that makes people uncomfortable.
Exactly. And Lakoff would argue that they chose that language very deliberately because it was just the first step. The goal wasn't just to ban this one procedure, it was to chip away at abortion rights more broadly.
To create this kind of slippery slope where one restriction leads to another and another.
Exactly. And that's why understanding these tactics is so important. We can't just focus on the surface level of the debate. We need to be aware of the deeper strategies at play, the long game that's being played.
So how do we do that? How do we become more aware of those, like, linguistic tripwires?
It starts with paying attention. Pay attention to the language being used, not just the words themselves, but the values they're appealing to, the emotions they're trying to evoke. It starts with paying attention. Pay attention to the language being used, not just the words themselves, but the values they're appealing to, the emotions they're trying to evoke.
So it's like being a language detective, looking for those hidden clues that reveal the real agenda.
Exactly. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. It's everywhere.
It's kind of like that scene in The Matrix where, like, Neo starts seeing the code instead of the real world.
Right. You start realizing how much of our political reality is shaped by these carefully constructed narratives.
And how much of it is, like, completely manipulated by these, like, linguistic black belts.
Exactly. But the good news is, once you understand how the game is played, you can start playing it too.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we, like, level up our language game?
Well, Lakoff has a ton of advice on that, but I think it boils down to a few key things. First, we need to get clear on our own values. What do we stand for? What kind of world do we want to create?
Okay, so step one, define your own values. Don't let other people define them for you.
Exactly. And once you're clear on your values, you need to talk about them. Constantly connect every issue back to those core principles.
So it's not just about winning arguments. It's about, like, changing the whole conversation.
Yeah.
Shifting the Overton window, as they say.
We need to stop being afraid to talk about our values, to talk about things like empathy and compassion and fairness.
Because those aren't just, like, nice ideas. They're the foundation of a just and equitable society.
Precisely. And when we lead with those values, we can start to change the way people think about the world. We can create a new narrative, a more hopeful and inclusive narrative.
It's like we're writing a new chapter in the story of our country,
I
right?
love that. That's a
Wow.
great way to put it. And it's a chapter that I think a lot of people are hungry for. Right now, there's so much division, so much anger and fear.
People are, like, yearning for something to believe in.
Exactly. And I think progressives have a real opportunity here. We have the values, we have the ideas, we just need to get better at communicating them.
We need to become masters of the language game.
Precisely. We need to meet people where they are, speak to their hopes and fears, and offer a vision of a better future.
A future where everyone has a chance to thrive.
Yeah.
Not just a select few.
Exactly. That's the world I want to live in. And I think it's a world that a lot of people want to live in if we can just articulate that vision in a way that resonates with them.
So what you're saying is words have power.
They always have, but I think we're starting to realize just how powerful they really are, especially in this age of like social media and 24/7 news.
When a tweet can go viral in seconds and shape the entire national conversation.
Exactly. So we need to choose our words carefully, we need to use them wisely, and we need to use them to build a better world.
That feels like a good mission statement for, well, for life in general.
I think so too.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up our deep dive into Don't Think of an Elephant. It's been fascinating, insightful, and honestly a little bit scary to realize how much of our thinking is shaped by forces we don't even see,
I agree. It's definitely a wake-up call, but it's also incredibly empowering.
because it means we're not powerless. We have agency. We have the power to change the narrative.
Exactly.
So to our listeners, we say, go forth and be language ninjas. Challenge those frames. Reframe the debate. And never underestimate the power of your words.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep those brains buzzing.